Let me ask you a question, huh? How's your mutual fund? Hey, for that matter, how's all your funds? Has the fund left your funds, huh? Has your do-re-mi taken a W-A-L-K, huh? What if I told you that I knew about an investment you could make that the return would be mind-boggling? And it's promised. It's guaranteed. I know what you're saying. There's no guarantees. This one's guaranteed, okay? Malachi 3:10. So it says in the Old Testament, it says, test me, give to God, and he will give you back. It goes like this. I give this, he gives this. I give this, he gives this. I give this, right up there. He keeps giving. I can't outgive God. How crazy is that? Do I love him? Sure, whatever. I'm just saying, if you give, he gives back.
Howdy. Wow, that was a kind of weak. How about howdy? That's better. Okay. Good to see all of you here today. Wow. Dwayne was just telling me a minute ago that one of the popular TV preachers is asking for $65 million so he can get a new jet. I heard that's what he said. So okay, whatever, you know. Wow. Let me just welcome you to week number 5, actually, of our series called Tithe Phobia. And in this series, what we're doing is we're talking about what the Bible has to say about giving, more specifically about what this whole tithing thing is really all about. And so far, what we've discovered, last time we talked about and learned about the idea, you know, with the widow's mite, about how, you know, a lot of religions, a lot of churches think that they teach that the widow gave all that she had because she loved God so much and all those different kind of things. But you know what? The fact is that the same basic principle in the Old Testament is the same as it is in the New Testament, which is what Paul says in Romans chapter 10, verses 14 and 15, when he says, how will they call on a preacher if they, you know, and somebody they haven't ever heard about? So the whole thing that we're talking about here, and there's 2 verses there if you want to look those over. You know, how will they believe in whom they have not heard, and how will they hear without a preacher? And then the next verse, how will they preach unless they are sent? Just as written, how beautiful are those who bring good news. Well, the fact is that when we're giving our money, we're not giving our money to God. You know, we're taught that a lot. We're to have a lot of people say, well, when you got to give all your money to God, as if God somehow needs our money. Well, I don't think there's any God has any need for money when he already owns this entire universe. He's the one who created it. What does God need more money for? You know? But the whole idea is that when we give, we're giving for the purpose of helping others be able to hear the message of Jesus Christ. Simple as that. That's what it's all about. It has nothing to do with giving your money to God. It has nothing to do with this whole tithing thing, all that kind of stuff. As a matter of fact, it's the same point that James made in chapter 2 and verses 15 and 16 when he said, if a brother or sister is without clothing and in need of daily food, and one of you says, you know, go in peace and be warmed and filled, and yet you do not give them what is necessary for their body, I mean, what use is that? Well, it's the same kind of a principle. Is that, you know, if you say, well, I sure wish more people could hear about Jesus or hear about the awesome message of Big G grace in Jesus Christ, well, but if you don't do anything about it, it's the same thing, right? It's the same whole idea. Is that, you know, if you really want others to hear, it's going to take money to do that. Simple fact of the matter. It has nothing to do with, you know, making somebody rich or all those different kind of things. So not only is the tithe not taught in the Old Testament or in the New Testament, tithe isn't even taught. 10% thing isn't even in the Bible. It's something that religion has come up with in order to try to, you know, bilk people out of their money and all those different kind of things. Instead, it's simply for the purpose of giving others the same opportunity to hear about Jesus Christ and Big G grace in Him that you've had. You know, because they're not going to hear unless somebody is sent. Unless you want to go yourself, which most of us would say, not me, you know, because a lot of us haven't been called to be pastors or teachers or missionaries or whatever. So today what we're going to be doing is we're going to look at a passage out of the New Testament, and I want to give you 3 good reasons for giving, okay? Paul gives us 3 good reasons for giving, and if we'll take his advice on these things, I think that we'll find that our lives are blessed, and that we will also be a blessing to countless other people as well. Look at it. It's found in 2 Corinthians chapter 9 and verses 6 and 7. He says, and we're going to take a look at these verses in a little more detail today. Now this I say, he who sows sparingly will also reap sparingly, and he who sows bountifully will also reap bountifully. Each one must do just as he has purposed in his heart, not grudgingly or under compulsion, for God loves a cheerful giver. How many of you have heard those verses before? Probably a lot of us have, maybe even most of us. At least those of us who've been raised in church or been around religion at all, we probably had been told those verses at one point in time or another. So the three things that we're going to be talking about are about giving generously, and the second one will be with predetermination, and the third one is for a purpose. Okay? Those three things are important, and they have nothing to do with tithing or percentages or giving because you have to, or you're supposed to, or you ought to, or any of those different kind of things. I'll just throw that out of your head to begin with. So first of all, then, as we start to look at the first one, which is to give generously. As much as I hate to say it, there are many in the religious world today who literally sell a brand of theology that literally takes God's words and turns them against Him. I hate to say that, but it's true. It's fact. Just as I said a moment ago, the preachers that say, well, I need a new jet, so you need to give $65 million. Well, and it's all put it back on God. God says you're supposed to give, so just give it, those kind of things. In other words, we often take verses like the one we just read here, and people will, they teach and believe and espouse all those different kind of things, that this is the way to get rich, If you want to get rich, if you want your life to be blessed, if you want God to bless you with, increased wealth and all those different kind of things, bless your finances, is to follow His command to give first, right? To give Him the first. Give God 10% right off the top, and then God will bless you from there. Well, there's other passages certainly that are used to supposedly support this idea. For example, in Luke chapter 6 and verse 38, it says, give and it will be given to you. They will pour into your lap a good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over, for by your standard of measure it will be measured to you in return. Okay? Another verse that's often used, even more famous maybe, is the one in Malachi 3:10, which we saw in the video clip as we just opened with a minute ago, where God says, bring the whole tithe into the storehouse, so there may be food in my house, and test me now in this, says the Lord. If I will not open for you the windows of heaven and pour out for you a blessing until it overflows. Well, you know what? Taking it out of context, man. When they say things like, well, if you just do that, God will bless you, or even here as we're looking at in 2 Corinthians 9:6, this I say, he who sows sparingly will also reap sparingly, right? And I've heard that preached on, as maybe a lot of you have as well. That God says, hey, listen, if you only want to get a 10% return on what you give to God, then only give God for 10%, right? If you want 50% return, then give God 50%. And the more you give, the more God's going to bless you. All those different kind of things. And, if you just do what God says, do with your money. If you give God the first tenth right off the top, then God will be, in some way, in somehow or another, required to give back to you many times over. It says so right here, right? Doesn't it? That if you give to God, then God will give it back to you, pressed down, shaken together many times over. No, it doesn't say that. It doesn't say that. Okay. Before we look at it a little more, let me just give you an illustration. Let me tell you about some people that I knew as a young man, and that's been many years ago now. I hate to admit that, but a young married couple that I was friends with many, many years ago, and they were really struggling financially, as a lot of young couples do, right? They were really struggling financially, and they were going to this church, and so they thought, well, they'll just go see the pastor. They were telling me this. I was there for the whole, all that stuff. And so they went to see the pastor for counseling, as to what do we do? I mean, we're struggling financially. The preacher was preaching on tithing and giving to God and all those different kind of things like a lot of people do. And, hey, if this is your first time with us and here you are, I'm preaching on money. It's been 5 years since I talked about money here. So you're just lucky. If it's your first time, you just got lucky, that's all. So they went to the pastor and they said, what do we need to do? Of course, he quoted this very verse for them. If you give to God, if you give your money to God, doesn't matter whether you can afford it or not. If you give your money to God, God will give it back to you. Pressed down, shaken together, running over. And I tell you what, you'll just be blessed beyond anything you can imagine if you'll just give your money to God. You just give 10% right off the top. So I'll tell you what. That's exactly what they did. They went to church that very next Sunday after they had talked to the pastor and talked about among themselves for that week and decided, you know what, we're so bad off financially, we got to do something about this, and we're just going to stand on God's promise and we're going to give God 10% even if we can't afford it. We just don't have any money left over at the end of the month and all those different kind of things, and so. And as a matter of fact, the pastor told him that's exactly the reason why you're struggling in your finances. Because you're not given to God, right? What's a threat? It's a threat, and it's used a lot. The reason you're not rich is because you're not giving your money to God. If you give your money to God, God will make you rich. So since they were told they should pay their tithe and give God, what they owed Him and all different kind of things, and especially since they couldn't afford it, that's even more reason to give to God. If you can't afford it, that's why you can't, because you're not giving to God. So especially if you can't afford it, you certainly need to give your money to God. So they stepped out in faith, and they gave their money to the church the next Sunday. Even though they didn't have the money to give, their finances were in the toilet and all those different kind of things, and they expected God, they were going to stand on God's promise that God would give it back to them many times over, shaken down, pressed together, running over, all those different kind of things. And to show that they had such great faith in God, in God's promises, God promised, if I'll give Him my money, He'll give it back to me. The very next Monday morning, they went out and bought themselves a brand new luxury car. You're laughing because you already know the rest of the story. And you're right. You're exactly right. They went bankrupt. They got divorced. Life went to hell in a handbasket. All those different kind of things. Of course it did. Duh. Use your brain. God gave you that thing between your ears for a reason. So let me ask you this question then. Did God not come through for them? Didn't God say, hey, listen, if you give your money to me, I'll give it back to you, pressed down, shaken together, running all over, those kind of things? Is God not trustworthy? Well, not at all. That's not what happened at all. Well, why not? Because all of those ideas about, that come from the religious teaching that God requires us to give our money to Him, and if we do what we're required to do, then God will be faithful, to our obedience, and He'll give it back to us, and all those different kind of things is just a bunch of, I'll call it just BS, that steaming green pile of manure, that French word. So is that what God said He will do, or is it not? Well, check it out. In light of what we just learned about giving, tithe isn't even taught in the Bible. It's not even there, much less required for any reason. And the fact is that if we're not giving to God as though God somehow needs our money, then we're going to be in trouble. Well, it's obviously that religion has not only totally missed the heart of God, but has completely misread who God is and what God is like. So if we're giving because we think it's the way to get, then we've turned God's words against Him. We've used His words against Him for our own personal gain because we are, self-centered and self-seeking. So the question is, what did Jesus mean when he said, give and it will be given to you? Pressed down, shaken together. What did he mean? What did Jesus really mean when he said that? Did he mean it or not? Well, of course he did. But I think what we need to do is read it for what he did say, not for what he didn't say. Make sense? We need to read it for what he actually did say, because we want to read it for what we hope he said rather than what he really did say. Right? So what did he say? Well, check this out. Given to be given to you. Oh, there it is. Did you see it? They. Aha. Exactly. They. Who is they? Well, it sure ain't them. That works. That's a good answer. It certainly ain't God, right? It's Jesus who's talking about it. If it's Jesus who's saying these words and he said, given to be given to you, I will pour into you. He didn't say that. He's talking about this level. He's talking about on a horizontal level between us. Not on the vertical level between us and God, but between us. If you're generous with other people, they also will be generous with you. It's not that hard. But we want to read it for what we hope it says rather than what it actually says. That generosity begets generosity, you know? It's a circular flow kind of thing. A circular flow of compassion and gratitude. I've got a good friend who lives in the northern part of New Mexico. His name is Jan Brown. He's a guide and outfitter. I've run, with him a lot in many years past. Great guy. Really doesn't claim to be a believer in Jesus Christ. Just a great guy. But you know what? In all the years I've known him, if I go to him and say, I need whatever it is, it's mine. I don't ask him because I know that if I ask him, he'll give it to me. Doesn't matter. He'd give you He'd give you the shirt off his back. He would. He's helped me out with things many times. And you know what? I would give him the shirt off my back for the same reason. Now, there's a lot of other people I wouldn't give them nothing. Right? Because they're always doing this. And that's all they do. That's all they do. You know what I'm talking about. It's exactly what this is saying. Listen, if you want other people to be generous with you, then you also need to be generous with them, right? It's a give and take thing. It's not all about me, me, me. It's about, well, do we want to bless the lives of others and be blessed as well? So we are blessed as much or more than what they are. Because it's not about giving God our money and He'll give it back to us as though that's who God is and that's how God operates. So nowhere is this whole idea of giving, being generous with others, have that ability to return generosity to us, right? That if you give, they will also give back to you, right? You'll also be receiving from others, at least a blessing, whether it's monetary or not. That doesn't say that, right? But nowhere is this more true than the sharing of our finances, in particular, though, for the purpose of helping others hear about the good news of big G grace and freedom in Jesus Christ. Nowhere is that more true than right here. I mean, where could the return be greater, right? Because helping others to hear about Jesus Christ is probably the most important thing you could ever do. Because you can't get around the fact that he who sows sparingly will also reap sparingly, right? It's not about God. It's about this level. It's not about the vertical. It's about the horizontal. I mean, think about it. It just, as it said, sowing, what's that talking about? Planting. Thank you. Sowing seed, right? Well, it's obviously this level then, right? I mean, it doesn't say anything about God there. It says, listen, the fact of the matter is, if you're a farmer and you have 640 acres of farmland, and you go, you know what? I think I'm going to plant those fields today. You take one corn seed and you walk out in the middle and you plant it and you go, cool, it'll be a big harvest next year. How stupid is that, right? Duh. No, it's going to take lots and lots and lots of seed to plant that whole 640 acres. But the yield also is going to be huge as well. Same thing applies, right? In other words, the less money that we have to operate on here at GraceLifeTV.tv, the fewer people we're going to be able to reach. Simple as that. I mean, we've been struggling with that for a while now, especially in the finance meeting. We've been talking about, well, how are we going to reach out? Well, we need to do this, we need to do that, we need to do something else. But it's expensive, and we can't do that. That's fact. That's fact. Simple fact of the matter. So your hands are kind of tied in that respect. But you know what? The less money that we give, the less people are going to hear, The fewer people we're able to reach, the fewer there's going to be who respond to God's awesome offer of grace and freedom in Jesus Christ. And the fewer people who respond to God's offer, the fewer there's going to be of us. And the fewer there are of us, the fewer there are to help get this awesome message out to those who really need to hear it. It's really simple. The problem is that we've been taught this religious garbage for so long that we've missed the point altogether. So Jesus simply says, give generously, you'll be blessed generously. Not that God's going to bless you generously, as though somehow you're giving your money to God and God's going to give your money back to you. That's all a self-centered thing. But you know what? To be able to get the message out to others is real blessing. Is real blessing. Second thing Paul tells us about in 2 Corinthians 9 is that we should give with predetermination. And for lack of a better word, that's just that's what I'm going to use, predetermination. In other words, he says each one must give just as he has purposed in his heart to give, right? Whatever you've decided to give that. Is that a percentage? Well, it could be. Is it an amount? Well, it could be that too. Does it matter? No, it really doesn't. It really doesn't. Not at all. That's not the point. If that's what you're thinking, you've missed the point altogether. It's not about a percentage or an amount. It's just about whatever you decide in your own heart to give, right? It's interesting that actually the original Greek word that's translated purposed in this verse is a word that literally means to choose one thing over another. Right? I think that's a good thing to know because we choose one thing over another all the time, right? I mean, always we're making decisions. When I go into a restaurant to order, and the waitress comes up and she said, "What would you like?" I said, "Man, if you didn't have so many choices, it'd be a lot easier." Right? If there's only one thing on the menu I could order right away, but since there's so many choices, it's hard to make, right? Well, we're making choices all the time, no matter where we're at. And I don't think there's any doubt that there's a bazillion different things that we could spend our money on, and there are a bazillion different things that we may want and or need in our lives. And most of us have already decided that, paying the bills is kind of important. Paying the mortgage or paying the rent so you got a place to live, that's kind of important. I would say so too. I think that needs to come first. And if you got the idea that, well, if you just give to God what you owe to God, God's going to pay the rent for you, I already told you that story. So giving something that we have purposed, predetermined in our heart to give means that we have thought about it beforehand. We've chosen one thing over another. Certainly, we've, no matter how rich we are, no matter how much money we have, there's always other things we could spend it on. It's just whatever's important, most important in your life, right? That's where we need to do this predetermination thing, where we need to decide in our own life and heart what is most important, right? Now, certainly there are bills to pay, and that has to be done, and please, don't let that go. I don't care, So that's really, I've told you before, that's where the percentage thing breaks down anyway. A person who only makes $100 a month, if they were to give 10%, that could mean they were going to miss several meals this week. Person that makes $100,000, they give 10%. It's not too hard to live off $90,000. I mean, really? But the fact is, we always spend up to our limit anyway, don't we? No, I don't. I don't know about you guys. Yeah, I know. and then the word grudgingly, somehow feeling like we're forced to give, that's what religion does to us. Makes you feel like you're forced to give. You got to give for one reason or another, and there's all kinds of threats that go with that. But actually, that word grudgingly or reluctantly or grievingly or grief or sorrow, however you want to, all those different kind of words, is the original Greek word. The root for it is a person's mourning. mourning, not mourning as the sun comes up, but when you're in mourning over something. As a matter of fact, Thayer's Greek dictionary expounds on his word by saying that it is a sour and reluctant mind which brings on the usual sorrow of men at the loss of their earthly possessions. You know what? If you're given for that reason, wow. Well, you give them for the wrong reason for sure. And then being under constraint or distress speaks of something that is imposed on us, either by external conditions of things or by the law of duty. Now, that don't sound too good, does it? None of those things sound very good. That you're forced to, you ought to, you have to, all those different kind of... Is that what God is trying to do to us? Well, that's what religion does to us all the time, is trying to tell us, well, you have to, you're supposed to, you ought to. And if you don't, God won't bless you. Well, we've already learned that that's not the case anyway. God don't need your money. But it's all on what you've decided is most important in your life, in the lives of others. As a matter of fact, when it comes to making somebody do something, you try to make me do something. Kind of bow up. You can ask me if you want to. Many years ago, I pastored a church up at Weed, New Mexico, up in the mountains, in Sacramento Mountains, pretty high country. A lot of snow from time to time, and there was the road grader guy, and of course that's a real, very rural community. I've said many times before, there was 21 people that lived actually in town, and I didn't live in town. But the guy that ran the road grader, he came by one Saturday actually, when he was blading the snow out of the roads, and he actually bladed us out of the church. He put a great big old berm of snow about that tall, so you couldn't even get into the church. You couldn't get into the parking lot. You couldn't get in nowhere, His name was Willard. So I went up talking to Willard up a few miles up the canyon in another small town, and even smaller than Weed. I said, "Hey, Willard, that snow's kind of banked up there in front of the church." I said, "Well, I understand you got a busy schedule and all that. Would you mind coming by sometime when you get a chance and, just make us kind of a driveway to get in there? It'd be a really big help for us." He looked at me and he said, because he'd put up with a lot of that crap from people, said, "You know what? If you hadn't asked me, I'd have never done it." Because people are always demanding, you got to come bleed me out. I got to have room out here, If I'd have gone to him and said, listen, I can't believe you did that. How could you do that to a church especially, right? Bleed us out so we can't even get in there? He said, you'd have just sat there, because I would never done it. I know how he feels. I'm kind of that my way myself sometimes, I think the rest of us are like that too, if you want to be honest about it. But grudgingly is preceded by, that particular word in the Greek is preceded by a little prepositional phrase, out of. And out of means the reasoning behind something. That's important. It means the reasoning behind something, or the source from which the reasoning comes, right? In other words, what he's saying is that, give grudgingly, is that if it's in your heart to give, give. If it's not in your heart to give, then it's going to be grudgingly. It's going to be a grudgingly thing. But you know what? If it comes from our heart, if it's something we want to do, is anybody going to have to pressure you into it? No. Why does it take me 5 years to talk about money again? Not because I'm afraid to talk about money. I'm just not going to pressure anybody into doing that. If anybody's going to pressure, it's going to have to be the Holy Spirit that does that. And I'll never know it. That's between you and God, not me. Not me and you and God either. But you and God. Period. That's your business, not mine. No one will have to force you or coerce you or, pressure you into doing that. If that's what's in your heart to do, you'll do it. Simple as that. The last one then, and we need to kind of get going here, which is, I think, maybe one of the most important, is that God loves a cheerful giver. Always liked that one. Because it just seems so stupid to me, especially in religious circles, it just seems so stupid. If you don't give to God, God's going to get it from you one way or another. Now give cheerfully. Okay? Hey, I'm not sure how that's going to work out, but, I mean, how can you have a preacher stand up there and tell you have to give, and if you don't give all the different kind of things, then now give cheerfully? Well, I guess the way they get around that is by saying, like this young couple I was telling you about, that if you give to God, God will give it back to you. Well, of course, I can give cheerfully that way if I think that it's a reason that, I'm going to get rich off of it. But it's a wrong idea about being cheerful about it, I think. It's a whole backwards thing. So how is it possible then, because it says so. He says, God loves a cheerful giver. Well, how in the world do you give cheerfully? I think we've already covered that. If you've already purposed in your heart to give that amount, whatever it is, if that's what you've decided is you want to give, and you know that the purpose behind it is you're not giving it to God, and you're not giving it to this church in that sense, in the strictest sense, but you're giving it for the purpose of helping others to hear about the awesome message of big G grace and freedom in Jesus Christ. And you're going, wow, why wouldn't want to do that? Of course I do, Literally means that we've already decided in our heart of hearts that the church and the ministry that we're giving to is worthy of giving to, is worthy of my support. So therefore, I would automatically become a cheerful giver because, listen, I'm going to give to something I feel confident in. That it's going to be going for a good purpose. If I don't feel that way, I ain't going to give, right? The fact is, there have been periods in my life when I didn't give at all. And for one reason or another. Sometimes it's just simply because I couldn't afford it. Sometimes it's because I just simply didn't want to. I had other things I wanted to do, thinking more about myself and not caring about anybody else. But you know what? When I came to understanding of what big G grace is all about, and And that's totally different from the grace that we hear in religious circles today. For those of you who've been coming any length of time, you know that. Has nothing at all to do with the little g grace that we hear in religion today. But when I came to understanding of what big G grace is really all about, I suddenly realized that this message is too awesome to keep to myself. I think I told you last week that when I came to understanding of that, after 18 years of ministry as a pastor in a denominational church, and then I just flat quit. I walked away from church and all things religious, swearing to myself and to God and everybody else I would never go back. Period. I was done. And during that period of time between when I pastored denominational church, and actually this is the very next church after that. During that period of time, God finally got through my thick skull what big G grace is really all about. Taught me some things that I never thought were possible, much less even probable. And once I understood those things, I finally had something of great importance to tell others. Couldn't wait. Still can't wait to tell people about God's awesome big G grace, what that's all about. So from that point on, I wanted to do whatever I needed to do, whatever was necessary to help others hear and understand who God really is and what God is really like, which is totally different than what religion teaches us today. And from that point on, I not only began to give the amount that I had predetermined to give, because that's what I wanted to give, but I can give cheerfully because I know it's going for a good reason, going for a good purpose. Don't have a problem with that. Because I know there's no greater blessing, I'll speak for myself, there's no greater blessing for me than to see someone else's life changed by the awesome message of big G grace in Jesus Christ. And I'm talking about people who have, even people, and sometimes especially people who have been saved in that sense all their life. They've known God. They've gone to church all their life. They've done all the religious stuff. When they come to understanding of what big G grace is really all about, their lives are literally freed. They are set free. They're made free to just, wow, life changes. And I can see that they are blessed in the way that I was blessed. And I'm going, man, why wouldn't I want for that for anybody? I want that for everybody. I want that for everybody. And that makes me a cheerful giver. I don't mind. It's not a problem. So I guess you have to ask your own self the question. Is this message worthy of getting out to others? Is it worthy for others to hear? This church, as many of you already know, is very, very far in between other churches that teach and preach what we do. I mean, they're just not out there. We have people move from here to many other places and always calling me back and say, can you suggest a church over here that preaches the same thing that you do? I can't. They're just not out there. There's a few. They are there. But they're very few and far between. So is this church worthy of giving your money to see that message go out? You'll have to ask yourself that question. I can't answer that for you. That's up to you to answer that question. And if it is, then give generously because it's needed. And give with predetermination. Decide beforehand what you want to give, the amount you want to give. Well, that's a percentage. If that's what you want to do, fine. If you want to give an amount, that's fine. If it's $1, that's fine. If it's $100 million, that's fine. I really don't care. I really honestly don't care, and I don't know. I've already told you before, I don't know who gives and who don't give. And I don't want to know. Because I don't want to take a chance on treating anybody else differently than I do another person. I don't know if you give or don't. So if you're thinking I'm preaching to you, throw that out of your head, because I don't know whether you give or not, and I really don't care. All I care about is that you hear the message of this awesome big G grace in Jesus Christ. That's all I care about. But I can tell you that it takes money to do that. And I can tell you that we really don't have what we need. We honestly don't have what we need to get that message out. We really don't. All we are doing right now is maintaining. That's it. And we are bare bones. We are bare bones. And I really honestly wish that we could do the advertising we need to do, that we could reach out and to reach more people with this message, because it's important, guys. You know it is. You know it is. So you'll have to answer those questions in your own heart and mind. So think about that. Pray about that. See what the Lord would have you do in that respect. You just do whatever you want to do. I don't want to know about it. I don't want to know about it. You just do whatever you think's right. God's awesome. Exodus tells us that the Lord is a warrior. The Lord is His name. Let's be warriors in His kingdom and fight the good fight and go out there and do what needs to be done. Because we have the warrior of warriors as our leader, Jesus Christ. Lord bless you all.